I never thought a routine visit to my brother's house would end with the police arresting the neighborhood's most notorious HOA president. But that's exactly what happened. And it all started when Karen, the so-called community watchdog, set her sights on my deaf brother, Mark. She had a reputation for overstepping boundaries, but I never imagined she would cross this line. It was a sunny Saturday morning when I drove up to Mark's house. The air smelled like freshly cut grass, and for a moment everything felt normal. But as I pulled into his driveway, I noticed her car, bright white, spotless. The kind of car that screams, "I own the street," parked just 2 houses down. Karen was standing there, clipboard in hand, glaring in Mark's direction. She looked like she was ready to pounce. Mark waved at me silently as I stepped out of the car. For those who don't know, Mark communicates using sign language, and Karen seemed to view this as an opportunity to correct him, whatever that meant. She stormed up the sidewalk, muttering under her breath, and then started shouting instructions at Mark in a tone so aggressive it made my skin crawl. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The entire neighborhood had seen Karen's obsession with control before, but this felt different. She wasn't just meddling with minor HOA rules anymore. She was targeting my brother in the most humiliating way possible. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Karen noticed immediately and spun toward me, her face turning bright red with anger. "You can't just record me," she yelled. "I can, and I am," I said firmly. "You're harassing my brother." Her face contorted like a cartoon villain, and in that instant, I knew she had no idea what she was walking into. She tried to intimidate me, gesturing wildly, and threatening to call the authorities, but Mark's calm presence and the evidence on my phone were already working against her. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like something was about to explode. Then it happened. Karen made a move she immediately regretted, reaching into Mark's yard as if she had the right to dictate how he lived. That was the line. The moment she crossed it, the game changed. I dialed 911, explaining the situation clearly. An HOA, president harassing a deaf man on his own property. Within minutes, sirens cut through the quiet suburban morning, and Karen's shock was priceless. She never expected that her own obsession with control would land her on the wrong side of the law. The sound of sirens grew louder as Karen's face shifted from shock to panic. She tried to straighten her posture, to act like she was in control. But it was too late. The police car pulled up, and 2 officers stepped out, scanning the scene with professional calm. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but I could tell she didn't know what to say. This was the first time in years she had met someone who wouldn't back down from her intimidation tactics. Mark stood silently, his hands folded calmly in front of him, watching Karen squirm. The officers approached, and I explained the situation, pointing to my phone where the recording had already captured every word, every aggressive gesture. Karen immediately tried to interject, raising her voice and insisting she had every right to enforce HOA rules. But the officers were patient and thorough, asking her to step aside and give her statement. As she stumbled over her words, I noticed the neighbors gathering at the edge of their lawns. Many had experienced Karen's overreach before, but witnessing her confront someone who wouldn't be intimidated seemed to shake them. Whispers spread through the crowd. "She's finally getting caught. I can't believe she went this far." The tension was thick, a mix of fear, satisfaction, and disbelief. Karen's statements became more frantic as the officers cross-referenced the HOA rules she claimed to enforce. It quickly became clear that she had no legal justification for her actions, especially against a resident who had every right to live peacefully in his own home. Her attempts at explanation only dug her deeper, highlighting her obsession with control over fairness or law. The officers then asked Karen to step into the squad car while they continued their investigation. Her hands trembled slightly as she followed their instructions, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely afraid. I could see the reality hitting her. This wasn't just another HOA dispute she could intimidate her way through. She was facing real consequences for harassing someone who had done Nothing wrong, but defend himself, calmly and legally. Mark, meanwhile, remained composed. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Karen's frantic energy. It was a moment that symbolized more than just justice. It was a turning point for our neighborhood. People were seeing that intimidation and abuse of power didn't have to go unchallenged. By the time the officers drove away with Karen, the air felt lighter, as if the neighborhood itself had exhaled after years of tension. But even as the sirens faded, I knew this was just the beginning. Karen would want revenge, or at least try to salvage her reputation in every way she could. And we had to be ready. After Karen was taken away, you would think the nightmare was over. But for Mark and me, it was only getting started. The next few days were tense, like walking on a tightrope with no safety net. Karen didn't disappear quietly. She was notorious for retaliating, and everyone knew it. Flyers appeared in neighbors' mailboxes, filled with half-truths and slander, painting Mark as difficult and a problem for the community. It was absurd, but that was Karen's style. Intimidate first, justify later. We stayed vigilant. I installed extra cameras around Mark's property, not out of paranoia, but because Karen had shown she would stop at nothing to manipulate or harass someone who didn't bow to her rules. Mark, though, remained calm. His resilience amazed me. He continued his routines, tending his garden, reading in the backyard, and signing quietly with me as if nothing had happened. It was a quiet defiance, and it struck a nerve with the neighbors who had watched Karen's behavior for years. One morning, we noticed something unusual. Tire tracks near Mark's driveway that didn't belong to him or any of the neighbors. I checked the cameras and saw Karen's car slowly driving past, circling the street multiple times. She wasn't hiding. She was sending a message. But this time, the difference was that we were ready. Every step, every attempt at intimidation was being recorded, documented and shared with the authorities. A week later, Karen escalated further. She sent a formal complaint to the HOA board, falsely claiming that Mark was violating community rules, even though she had no evidence. I responded immediately, submitting video evidence, witness statements, and a detailed report of her harassment. The HOA board, usually indifferent, couldn't ignore the mountain of proof. Karen's reputation was beginning to crumble under her own aggressive tactics. Then came the tipping point. One afternoon, she approached Mark again, this time standing at the edge of his yard and shouting at him in full view of the cameras. It was reckless, brazen, and exactly what we had anticipated. I called the police immediately. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was blatant, repeat intimidation. When the officers arrived, Karen's shock was priceless. Again, her pattern was predictable, and she had walked right into it. By the end of the day, Karen was issued another citation for harassment, with clear legal documentation. It was becoming clear that her attempts to control the neighborhood were failing, and every aggressive move only strengthened our case against her. Mark's silence and dignity were now our most powerful weapons, and Karen had no idea how unstoppable we had become. By the time Chapter 4 of this nightmare began, Karen's confidence was completely shattered. The once commanding HOA president, who prowled the streets with a sense of entitlement, was now cautious, calculating, and visibly nervous. Every neighbor she passed gave her wary glances, knowing her previous power had crumbled. And for Mark, it was a victory born not from aggression, but from resilience and patience. The final showdown came on a late Thursday morning. Karen had filed yet another complaint, claiming Mark had somehow violated HOA rules by disturbing the peace with his garden, maintenance, and outdoor activities. It was absurd, but predictable. I had anticipated her move, armed with a folder of documentation, video recordings, witness statements, prior police reports. I met her at the HOA board meeting, ready to expose her harassment once and for all. As the meeting began, Karen strutted in, attempting her usual intimidation tactics. Loud voice, condescending tone, exaggerated gestures. But the room was different this time. The board members no longer cowered. They were aware of her patterns. The neighbors who attended, some of whom had suffered under her overreach, watched in anticipation. Karen didn't realize that the tide had turned. Every lie, every manipulative attempt, was now in front of everyone who had witnessed it firsthand. I calmly presented the evidence. First, the recordings of her harassing Mark. Then, the documented history of repeated intimidation toward other neighbors. Each piece was irrefutable. Karen's face went pale as the board scrutinized the evidence. She tried to interject, to twist the narrative, but her arguments fell flat against concrete proof. Even her usual supporters in the neighborhood seemed unsure, some shaking their heads in disbelief at the woman who had once acted untouchable. The final blow came when the HOA's legal counsel addressed her directly, stating that her behavior constituted harassment and violated both HOA regulations and state law. The board voted unanimously. Karen was stripped of her powers as HOA president, fined for harassment, and formally warned that any further incidents could result in criminal charges. For once, the fear she had used to manipulate the neighborhood had turned against her. As Karen was escorted out, her expression a mix of shock, anger, and humiliation. The room collectively exhaled. Mark, calm and dignified as ever, smiled at me, signing, "Thank you." It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of triumph. She had underestimated him, underestimated us, and in doing so, had sealed her own downfall. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt safe again. Karen's reign of intimidation was over, replaced by accountability and respect. And while justice had been served legally, the true victory was seeing my brother treated with the respect he deserved, free from harassment in the home he loved. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more wild HOA drama, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and drop a comment below telling us what you would have done in this situation. Your support means we can keep bringing you these unbelievable real-life stories.